Because in pre-Islamic Arabia, the Quraysh tribe and the Arabs in Mecca and Medina, northern Arabia, they worship at least 360 gods and goddesses. According to these Muslim sources, there was an idol of the god Hubal or Hubal. Hubal was represented by the moon. He's the moon god, meaning the moon was his symbol. And he was considered the Lord of the Kaaba, the Lord of Mecca, the chief god in Mecca, and the Kaaba. Now, you know why that's interesting? Anyone who studied ancient Near Eastern polytheistic pagan religions will know. You will not find where they will build a house of worship for more than one god. Other gods could be honored there, yes. Yeah. But the house would be consecrated to one chief god. According to Islamic tradition, the Kaaba was built for the worship of which god? According to Islamic tradition, the Muslims. Allah. Now, the Kaaba was built for Allah.
Allah, yes.
This was his house. It was called Bayt Allah. They'll tell you that the pagans then added other gods and goddesses. Now, the same Muslim sources say Hubal, Hubal, was the chief idol, the chief god of the Kaaba, and he was the Lord of Mecca. Okay, now help me understand this. If the Kaaba is the house of Allah, and Allah is the Lord of the Kaaba and the Lord of Mecca, but then the same Muslim sources confirm Hubal was the chief god of the Kaaba, he was the Lord of Mecca and the Lord of the Kaaba. What does this tell us about Allah? Who was Allah if a house of worship can only be erected for one God? If the sources are telling us the Kaaba was the house of the chief god Hubal, but then they say it's the house of Allah, and Hubal is the Lord of Mecca, the Lord of the Kaaba, but then they say Allah is the Lord of the Kaaba, Lord of Mecca. What does this tell us about Allah? Allah was the name given to who?
Hubal.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So what did Muhammad do? He erased the memory of Hubal and removed Hubal from being connected to Allah.
Yes.
That means if you're reading carefully and you're reading what the sources tell you, and you understand how paganism worked, that means Hubal was called Allah. Allah was the name of Hubal. In other words, if you ask the pagans, who is this Allah you worship? They would say Hubal, Hubal. Your Il is Yahweh. Your Elohim is Yahweh. Your Eloha is Yahweh. Your Allah is Yahweh. But the Allah of the pagans at the Kaaba was Hubal. The Il of the pagans at the Kaaba was Hubal. The Elohim of the pagans at the Kaaba, his name was Hubal.
Yes.
So in other words, if I read the sources carefully, this is the conclusion. Hubal was the Allah of the Kaaba. Allah's name was Hubal, Hubal. If you understand that, I want you to see a second problem for Muslims. They keep telling us that the Arabs at Mecca are Hagarites, the descendants of Hagar, right? And they keep telling us that the Arabs at Mecca are the sons of Ishmael, right? But wait, Psalm 83 states that the Ishmaelites and the Hagarites didn't worship or acknowledge the true God Jehovah anymore. So if the pagans at Mecca and Medina are Ishmaelites and Hagarites, well, according to Psalm 83, the Ishmaelites and Hagarites no longer acknowledge or worship Jehovah as the only true God. They had been so far removed from the worship of the true God that the psalmist says they need now to see that Jehovah is the true God because they no longer recognize that or are aware of it anymore. That means long before the time of Muhammad, the Ishmaelites and the Hagarites had so been far removed, had so far removed themselves from the knowledge of the God of Abraham, who the true God was. They may have even forgotten that his name was Yahweh, or they may not even have known it anymore, that the psalmist has to pray, O God of Israel, these nations don't recognize you, are not aware of you, do not believe you're the only true God. Show them you're the true God so they can recognize that and be saved. Why would the Ishmaelites and the Hagarites need to be shown that Yahweh is the true God if they already knew that and believed it? So if the Muslims want to keep claiming the pagan Arabs at Mecca and Medina are Ishmaelites, Hagarites, they're only proving that those pagan Arabs were not worshiping the true God, so their Allah could not have been the true God, Yahweh. So you're stuck, Muslims. If you want to say they're descendants of Hagar and Ishmael, then Psalm 83 shows the Ishmaelites, Hagarites had forgotten about the true God, and they were no longer worshiping the true God. So you're proving your Allah, the Allah of the Kaaba, could not be the true God, Yahweh. But if you want to now agree with history and archaeology, those Arabs in Mecca and Medina were not Ishmaelites and Hagarites, according to the traditional Islamic narrative, then that's even more proof their God is not the true God Yahweh. Either way, Islam is destroyed and buried.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. Yes. Wow.
Everyone got it?
Yeah,
Yes.
sinking in, yeah.
I've now established that Hubble was Allah, Allah was Hubble. Why? Because now I'm going to quote the sources. The Muslim sources and scholars of Islam who are friendly to Islam all admit Hubble was the chief god of the Kaaba. Hubble was the chief god of Mecca. Hubble was the Lord of the Kaaba, the Lord of Mecca. And yet the Muslim sources tell us Allah was the chief god of the Kaaba, the chief god at Mecca, since you can't have more than one chief god. A house and a place is erected to one chief god.
Yeah.
If the sources tell us that the chief god of Mecca and Kaaba was Hubble, but also say it was Allah, then the only way you can avoid contradiction is to admit Hubble was Allah, Allah was the name of Hubble, Hubble was the name of Allah. They're the same God. This comes from Gods and Goddesses and Mythology, Volume 11, page 137. It's all there in that post. Edited by C. Scott Littleton. Hubble, Hubal, chief god of the Kaaba, a martial and oracular deity, a moon god. Uh-oh. Hubble is not only the chief god of the Kaaba, he's the moon god. That's why you have Christians saying Allah was originally the moon god. That's why you have Christian Prince, another warrior of the faith alliance, telling you Allah of the Kaaba was the moon god. Because if Hubble is the chief god and he's the moon god, and yet Hubble is Allah, that means Hubble, Allah is the moon god. Because Allah's Hubble, Hubble is Allah. So then what did Muhammad do? He removed Hubble from Allah, disassociated Hubble from Allah, separated Hubble from Allah in order to convince the pagans that Allah is actually the God of Abraham, not Hubble. That's what he did. By inspiration of Satan, he tried to convince the pagans the Allah that's worshipped here is not Hubble. It's the God of the Jews and Christians. So we all worship that God. No, the Allah of the pagans is Hubble. He cannot be mixed in with the true God, because that's what the Israelites did at the time of Elijah when the Israelites wanted to worship Baal with Yahweh or as Yahweh. And Elijah said, no, either you worship Baal or Yahweh. You can't have them both. Cyril Glasse, the New Encyclopedia of Islam, page 209. Hubble, an idol, the god of the moon. You guys catch it? Centuries before Islam, I want you to pay attention to this statement of fact that they're getting from the Muslim sources. Amr ibn Luhay, a chief of the tribe of Jarham, who dwelt in Mecca before the coming of the Quraysh tribe, brought the idol to the city from Syria. It was set up in the Kaaba and became the principal idol of the pagan Meccans. Uh-oh. You know who the chief god was in Syria? Baal. The false god Baal.
Yes.
Okay, but now think with me. If Hubble was an idol from Syria and the chief god worshipped in Syria is Baal, that means Hubble is simply the Arabic word for the Baal. That means Kaaba became the shrine of the false god Baal. In fact, some say Hubble either means Hubal, he is Baal, who, he, Baal, or it is the Arabicized corruption of the Hebrew Ha-Baal, the Baal. In other words, if you study the sources carefully, Islam is repackaged Baal worship, where Satan raised up another false prophet of Baal to deceive people into worshiping Baal as the God of the Bible. And his most successful prophet has been Muhammad thus far. Muhammad has led more people to worship Baal as God than any other false prophet in the entire history of mankind and the entire history of Israel.
Wow. Wow.
And another connection with Baal, Baal was appeased with human sacrifice. According to the Sirah literature, Hubble was appeased by human sacrifices. This comes from the Oxford Dictionary of Islam, page 117. Hubble, a pre-Islamic deity represented by an idol in Kaaba that was destroyed by Muhammad when he conquered Mecca in 630. Patron of the Quraysh, leading tribe of Mecca. You know what patron of the Quraysh means? It means that was their chief god. That was the god that they worshipped as their chief god. Now, guys, can I ask you a question? Last time I checked, Quraysh was Muhammad's tribe. And here we're told by the Oxford Dictionary that the chief god that the Quraysh worship as their supreme god was Hubble. That means Muhammad was raised in the worship of Hubble as his chief god. The Cambridge Companion to the Quran, page 24. The Sirah literature presents Mecca's cult as a pagan one to the god Hubble. So the religion of Mecca was devoted to who? Devoted to who? Hubble.
Hubble. Yes.
And depicts the Arabian religious environment in which Muhammad grew up as overwhelmingly pagan, the final vestiges of the ancient Near Eastern religious tradition. Mahmoud M. Ayub, a devoted Muslim scholar. Islam, Faith and History, page 15. Among the many deities that the Arabs worship in and around the Kaaba were the god Hubble and the three goddesses Alat, Al-Uzza, Manat. Hubble was originally a moon god and perhaps also a rain god, as Hubble means vapor. Wait. This Muslim saying Hubble, the chief god of the Quraysh, who owned Mecca, who owned the Kaaba, and religious rites were devoted to him, was the moon god? So that Muhammad was born to a tribe that worshiped the moon god Hubble? Wow, folks. This too is written by a convert to Islam named Martin Lings. He wrote an English translation on the life of Muhammad, and you can actually find it online. It's Martin Lings. He's since passed away. Martin Lings, Muhammad, his life based on the earliest sources. Page 5. Notice what he says. Khuza'a thus shared the guilt of Jarham. They were also to blame in other respects. A chieftain of theirs on his way back from a journey to Syria and asked the Moabites to give him one of their idols. They gave him Hubble. Wait, where did this idol come from? From the Moabites in Syria.
Yeah.
Wow.
Moabites in Syria. One of their chieftains went to Syria and asked the Moabites to give them one of their idols. They gave him Hubble, which he brought back to the sanctuary, setting it up within the Kaaba itself, and it became the chief idol of Mecca. Muslims, your Muslim sources say the Moabites gave Amr ibn Luhay an idol of their chief god Hubble, which he brought from Syria, and Mecca became the shrine, the house of the chief god Hubble, which was the god of the Moabites. But if you read the Old Testament and read Psalm 83, the Moabites, the descendants of Lot, did not worship Jehovah. They worshiped the false god Baal.
Yes.
What more proof do you want that Hubble is Baal? This is from Hisham ibn al-Kalbi, the Book of Idols, Kitab al-Asnam. Kitab al-Asnam, translated with introduction and notes by Nabih Amin Faris. This is from pages 19 and 23, 24. I won't read all of it. It's a lengthy one. I want to read the relevant parts. The Quraysh were wont to venerate her above all other idols. For this reason, Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, who during the Jahiliyyah days had turned to the worship of God and renounced that of Al-Uzza and of the other idols, said, Zayd renounced the pagans and their idolatry and said this, when he used to be a pagan, this is who he used to worship. Notice what he said. I renounce both Alat and Al-Uzza. For thus would the brave and the robust do. No more do I worship Al-Uzza and her two daughters, or visit the two idols of the Banu Ghanim, nor do I journey to Hubble and adore it, although it was our Lord when I was young. Zayd is from Mecca. He, along with the pagans, worshipped the chief god of Mecca and the Kaaba and the gods and goddesses. And he says, when we were young, I used to go to Hubble. Well, where did he go to Hubble to? The Kaaba.
The Kaaba.
And I used to worship Hubble because when I was young, he was my Lord, no more. Now notice what the source goes on to say. The Quraysh had also several idols in it and around the Kaaba. The greatest of these was Hubble. If the Muslim sources, because this is a book that was written by a Muslim early on, translated in English, are telling you Hubble was the chief god of the Kaaba, of Mecca. The religion was devoted to Hubble. The Quraysh worship Hubble as their god, their ilah, their Lord. Muhammad was born to the Quraysh tribe, born in Mecca, was raised in the pagan practices associated with the Kaaba. And yet these sources say the religious rites, the Kaaba, the practices were all devoted to Hubble as the chief god, as the Lord of Mecca as the Lord of the Kaaba, and he's the moon god. Convince me then that Allah wasn't the name of Hubal and that Allah wasn't the moon god. Convince me, Muslims. Folks, you don't understand what this is going to do to Islam. The majority of Muslims don't know this, and they'll be shocked to hear this, and they'll say you're lying. A leading Islamic scholar, Fred McGraw-Donner, notice what he says. At the center of the town was the shrine called the Kaaba, a large cubical building with a sacred black stone affixed in one corner. That was the sanctuary to the pagan god Hubal. What are some of the pagan practices that Muhammad adopted? This is Karen Armstrong. They would kiss the black stone embedded in the wall of the Kaaba, which was probably a meteorite that had once hurled to the ground. Oh, so wait, the pagans before Muhammad used to kiss the black stone and Muhammad adopted it? Now we know why the pagans did it. Why is Muhammad doing it? Then she says in that same source, officially the shrine was dedicated to Hubal, a Nabatean deity, and there was 360 idols arranged around the Kaaba, probably representing the days of the year. Karen Armstrong, you are not hostile to Islam. You're very friendly to Islam, and you bend over backwards to appease Muslims. And Muslims even invite you to lecture in their meetings, and they praise your books. And you admit that the shrine was officially dedicated to Hubal? Then who is Allah? If the Kaaba is the shrine of Allah, but it's the shrine of Hubal, and you can't have a shrine for more than one God, the necessary logical inference and conclusion, Allah was the name of Hubal, Hubal was the name of Allah. How do you get around it? That's the mastermind of Satan. Allah was the name for Hubal. Hubal is Baal. But in order to mislead and deceive people from realizing that they're worshiping the god Baal, he raised up Muhammad, the son of Satan, this Antichrist, and got Muhammad to disconnect, disassociate Allah from Hubal, so that the connection between Hubal and Allah was lost, so that you wouldn't see that Allah was simply Baal, in order to then deceive people into Baal worship, but disguising it as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Islam is nothing more than revamped Baal worship, and Baal was the chief competitor to Jehovah, and he's still the chief competitor to Jehovah under the guise of Islam. And even here, F.E. Peters, in his book, Hajj, this Muslim historian says, Amr ibn Luhay brought with him to Mecca an idol called Hubal from the land of Hit in Mesopotamia. Hubal was one of the Quraysh's greatest idols, so he set it up at the well inside the Kaaba and ordered the people to worship it. Thus, a man coming back from a journey would visit it and circumambulate the house before going to his family, and would shave his hair before it, all of which Muslims do. Circumambulate the Kaaba and shave their heads. Here, the source is saying the pagans were doing that before Muhammad. Now, let me read Ibn Kathir. The third line of evidence. Are you ready now for this story? The biography of Muhammad, the Prophet, by Ibn Kathir. Volume 1, pages 125, 126. Ibn Ishaq stated, it is claimed that when Abdul Muttalib received such opposition from Quraysh over the digging of Zamzam, he vowed that if 10 sons were born to him, who grew up and protected him, he would sacrifice one of them for the God at the Kaaba. For God at the Kaaba, Allah at the Kaaba. So notice his vow. If I have 10 sons, I will sacrifice one of them for God at Kaaba. Do you remember what the person said earlier? Oh yeah, but Baal demanded human sacrifice. Did you catch what Abdul Muttalib vowed? To sacrifice one of his sons. Oh yeah, but Baal demanded human sacrifice. Did you just catch it? Abdul Muttalib promised that if Allah gave him 10 sons, he would sacrifice one of his sons, a human sacrifice to Allah. Baal demanded human sacrifice. Allah demands human sacrifice. Let's see who's going to see this. Eventually, he had 10 sons grown up whom he knew would give him protection. Their names were Al-Harith, Al-Zubair, Hajl, Dirar, Al-Muqawwim, Abu Lahib, Al-Abbas, Hamza, Abu Talib, and Abdullah. He assembled them and told them of his vow and asked them to honor his pledge to God Almighty. Allah Azwajal, and all glorious is He. This is in Arabic, it's Allah. God in English, but Arabic Allah. So he vowed to Allah. Okay. They obeyed and asked him what he wanted them to do. He asked each of them to take an arrow, write his name on it, and return to him. Now watch this. Remember, he's going to go to Allah and sacrifice Allah. They did so and went with him inside the Kaaba to the site of their god Hubal, where there was the well in which offerings to the Kaaba would be placed. There, near Hubal, were 7 arrows which they would use for divining a judgment over some matter of consequence, a question of blood money, kinship, or the like. They would come to Hubal to seek a resolution, accepting whatever they were ordered to do or to refrain from. Guys, can you help me understand? If you made the vow to Allah, why are you going to the idol Hubal? And why did Ibn Kathir say that's your God? The God of Muhammad's family, the God of his grandfather, and his father was Hubal. It goes on to say that the lot fell on Abdullah, Muhammad's father. So Hubal wanted Abdullah to be killed. But then the Quraysh say, no, don't kill him. Make a deal with your God to see if he'll take camels in place, sacrifice camels in his place. Now watch here, pages 126, 127. So they left for Medina, where they found the diviner whose name was Sajjah. So they went to a witch to ask the witch, how can we appease Allah? How can I appease Allah so I don't kill Abdullah? Why would you go to a witch, a soothsayer, to tell you how to appease Allah? Are you catching this? I don't know if it's sinking in. What kind of God is Allah that would allow Abdul Muttalib to go to a soothsayer, a witch, a kahina, one who contacts spirits, to tell him how to appease Allah. And this is Ibn Kathir, one of the greatest Muslim scholars, saying this. So they left for Medina, where they found the diviner whose name was Sajah, as Yunus bin Bukayr reported from Ibn Ishaq, that was at Khaybar. They rode off again and went to her and sought her advice. Abdul Muttalib telling her of the whole problem regarding him and his son. She told him, leave me today until my attendant spirit comes and I can ask him. Wow. So not only do you go to a witch, a soothsayer, she says, wait, my spirit will show up. In other words, a demon, a Satan. And that demon and Satan will tell you how to ransom your son Abdullah. And Allah is going to accept it. Allah is going to accept it, folks. Allah is going to allow Abdul Muttalib to go to a witch, a soothsayer, and allow an evil spirit, a demon, a spirit to tell her how to appease Allah, and Allah is going to be okay with it. Now, what would the true God, Jehovah, Yahweh do? Yahovah do? If an Israelite went looking for a witch and took the advice of the spirit that inspired that witch to appease Jehovah, what would God do? The true God do? Okay, now watch. Let's keep going. They left her, and Abdul Muttalib prayed to Allah. So he's praying to Allah. Next day, they went back to her, and she informed them that she had a message. How much is the blood money you prescribe? She asked, 10 camels. Okay, and then they says, okay, go back and present your man as an offering and do the same with 10 camels. Then cast arrows to decide between him and them. If the divining arrows point to him, then add to the number of camels until your God is satisfied. Keep doing this devining of arrows until it points to the camels, not your son. Okay? And once it points to the camels, then you know that's how many camels you sacrifice to ransom your son Abdullah from being murdered. If it points to the camels, then sacrifice them in his place. That way you will please your God and save your man. So they went back to Mecca. When they had agreed to do so, as she had said, Abdul Muttalib said prayers to God, Allah. Then they offered up Abdullah and the 10 camels as sacrifice and cast the arrow. At that point, the men of Quraysh told Abdul Muttalib, who was standing near Hubal, praying to Allah, it's all over. Your God is pleased, O Abdul Muttalib. Wait, earlier it says their God was Hubal, and it says as he's praying to Allah, he's before the statue Hubal. At this point, the men of Quraysh told Abdul Muttalib, who was standing near Hubal, praying to Allah. Arabic is Allah, a God. It's all over. Your God is pleased, O Abdul Muttalib. But wait, who's his God? Is it Allah or Hubal? Because earlier Ibn Kathir told us this. They did so and went with them inside the Kaaba to the side of their God Hubal. Hold on. Abdul Muttalib prays to Allah by standing in front of the idol Hubal. Hubal is said to be his God and the God of his family. But then the Quraysh said, it's all over, your God is pleased, O Abdul Muttalib. So I'm really confused. If his God is Hubal, and he's praying to Allah, but he's shuffling arrows to the statue Hubal, and he's before the statue Hubal praying to Allah, are you trying to convince me that Hubal is not Allah, Allah is not Hubal? Why does Allah accept Abdul Muttalib going to a soothsayer witch? And why does Allah accept a demon telling that witch soothsayer how to appease Allah? And why is Abdul Muttalib going before the statue Hubal and shuffling arrows and praying to Allah at the statue of Hubal? And if Allah is his God, why did Ibn Kathir say Hubal is his God? What's going on here? What's the conclusion? Who is Allah truly? He is Baal, and Baal is another name of Satan. What more proof do you guys need from the Muslim sources when you combine them together that Islam is nothing more than Baal worship repackaged by Satan through his man Muhammad in order to entice the people of God today away from the worship of Jehovah like Baal did during the Old Testament period? How many of you are overwhelmed and shocked by the evidence? And how many of you are now convinced Islam is nothing more than Baal worship repackaged by Satan? I am not saying Muslims knowingly worship the false god Baal. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, if you're familiar with the Hebrew scriptures, you will note that the main competitor for the worship and allegiance of the Israelites was the false god Baal. All throughout the Old Testament, you'll find God chastening, disciplining, rebuking, punishing, even exiling his people for their habitual habit of turning to the false god Baal, B-A-A-L, right? The name Baal also pops up in the New Testament under the name Beelzebub. If you read Mark 3, for instance, 22 all the way 30, the Jews accused Jesus of casting out demons by Beelzebub, the prince of demons. Baal, that's the word Baal. Zebul means Lord of the flies, Lord of the house. But the chief god that Satan used to get Israel to worship something or someone other than Jehovah, was Baal. In fact, Baal is simply Satan's disguise. Because if you go with what the Jews said in Mark 3, 22 to 30, if you go with the Jews, Beelzebub, Lord of the flies or Lord of the house, is the prince of demons. But the prince of demons would be Satan. So here, if the Jews are right, and Jesus didn't correct them, he didn't correct them saying, no, you're wrong, Beelzebub is not the prince of demons, the ruler of demons. That means Beelzebub, Baal, is simply another name of Satan. Because there's only one ruler of demons, Satan. He rules the kingdom of darkness. All evil spirits are subject to him. So if Beelzebub or Beelzebul is the ruler of demons, then that means that's another name for Satan. Now, if that's true, and the Bible indicates that's the case, Baal is simply Satan disguising himself as a god to lead people away from the worship of the true God. If that's true, Allah is simply another form, another name for Baal, and Islam is simply another form of Baal worship, then that actually further confirms Islam is the religion of the devil. It's Satan's religion that Satan inspired through Muhammad to be the competitor against Judeo-Christianity, Judaism, Christianity. And that would make sense, right? Because all throughout Old Testament history, the chief competitor to Yahweh, Yahovah, was Baal. Right now, as we speak, the chief competitor, the chief religion competing for the devotion of the hearts and minds of not just the world, but of Jews and Christians is Islam. So it's like history repeating itself. As Solomon said in the book of Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun. The same lie, the same deceit, the same trickery being promoted throughout the ages, but under different disguises, repackaged. It's the same deceit, but repackaged, right? So just like during the Old Testament period, Baal was the chief antagonist of Yahovah, vying for the affection of the Jews, the Israelites. Now you have Baal again competing for the affections of believers, but under the guise of Islam, under the name of Allah. You understand where I'm going with this? You understand why it's important to understand? Is Islam simply the religion of Baal, a form of Baal worship? So make sure you save the links, okay? Okay, now, let me now qualify what I'm saying. There's a caveat. That doesn't mean the Muslims knowingly worship Baal. Thank the Triune God for that, the Father, Son, and Spirit. Thank the Lord Jesus. That doesn't mean Muslims know they're worshiping Baal. That's the deception. That's the deceit. Just like when the Israelites worshiped Baal, they didn't think they were worshiping Satan. Exactly, Winter King. Alat would simply be the Arabicized name for Ishtar, Astarte, Ishtar, Esther. Thank you, 100%. Okay, just like, follow with me. And Adrian Crescendi, what do you think jihad is? Don't insult me and don't let me block you. What do you think jihad is if it's not human sacrifice for Allah? Are you serious? One of the chief pillars in spreading Islam is jihad, human sacrifice. Killing the infidels, that's not human sacrifice? Just like the Israelites did not think they were worshiping Satan when they worshiped Baal. Did they think they were worshiping Satan? Do you think the Israelites thought they were worshiping demons when they worshiped Baal, or they worshiped Astarte, Ishtar, or they worshiped Eel's consort Asherah? Do you think they thought that they were worshiping Satan and demons, evil spirits? Even though the Israelites did not think they were worshiping demons, Satan and demons, when they worshiped the gods and goddesses of the nations, Baal, in some places Baal was a chief god, in other places they knew he was the son of Eel, but still he became the patron deity of many people, and I trust the Holy Spirit to guide me to address this issue correctly. They still were worshiping demons nonetheless. Deuteronomy 32 verses 16 to 17. Talking about the Israelites, they provoked him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations provoked him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers fear not. Did you catch it? The Israelites were sacrificing to devils, to demons, though that's not what they thought they were doing. You with me there? Similarly, Muslims don't think they're worshiping Baal. They think they're worshiping the true God of Abraham. And that's the deceit. Whether you know you're worshiping him or not. In fact, he doesn't care whether you acknowledge he exists or not. He doesn't even care if you're an atheist. He just doesn't want you to know the true God and the true gospel, because that's the only way you can escape him and overcome him, right? So here are the three facts I want to establish. Facts that either the sources themselves come out and say, or facts that are derived from what these sources are saying. What they call the natural inference, the necessary inference, the conclusion of what they're saying. Okay, here are the three facts. And this is all in my articles. Fact number one, Hubal. Hubal was the chief deity, the chief god of Mecca and of the shrine, the Kaaba. That's the first fact. Fact number two, Hubal was actually Baal. Hubal, and the Muslim sources will testify, was actually the Arabic name for Baal. Some people believe Hubal either comes from Hubal, he is Baal, two Arabic words, or it is an Arabicized corruption of the Hebrew words Ha-Baal, the Baal. Okay, let me spell it out. Some people will tell you that Hubal is either Arabic for who, he, Baal is Baal, or it's the Arabic corruption of Ha-Baal. The two Hebrew words Ha-Baal means the Baal. The third fact that obviously the sources don't come out and say it. The sources don't come out. Do you want to get blocked, brother? Make my day. The third fact, the sources don't come out and say it, but that's the logical, necessary inference, okay? Hubal was Allah, Allah was Hubal. If you actually read, quote unquote, between the lines, you're going to see Hubal was Allah, Allah was Hubal. I want to give you a little background on the pagan religion in Mecca. Mecca, Medina, that's Arabia. Mecca, according to the Muslim sources, is the place where Muhammad was born. He belonged to the Quraysh tribe. the Quraysh tribe, which was an Arab tribe that lived in Mecca. And according to the Muslim sources, the Meccans were into astral worship. Astral worship. Now explain what astral worship means. Like other ancient civilizations, they associated the planets and the sun and moon with their gods and goddesses. And in that link I gave you, I'm quoting the late Abdullah Yusuf Ali in his translation of the Quran, which I quote. He admits that the Arabs before Muhammad and during the time of Muhammad were into astral worship, where they worshiped the sun and moon and 5 planets because they thought there were only 5 planets. Now let's do the math. Sun, moon, 5 planets, that's 7, right? Follow with me. That's 7, right? Sun and moon and 5 planets. That's 7. Now, in many cultures, the sun was the male deity and the moon was the female deity. The sun was the male deity and the moon was the female consort, the female deity. Not in Arabia. In Arabia, the moon was the male deity and the sun was the female deity. And the sun was the consort, the wife of the moon. Are you with me there? Let me read what he says. This is a Muslim. Now, he's passed away, but he admits this. To revert to the worship of the heavenly bodies, okay? A few individual stars did attract the worshippers' attention, e.g. Sirius. First, last, and Protestant, text me if I'm buffering because I can't see because I got to read. I have my phone here, God willing. So the Arabs worship Sirius, the dog star, the brightest fixed star in the heavens with a blush tinge in its light. It is probably Sirius that is referred to as the fixed star in the parable of Abraham. With regard to the fixed stars and their myriads, the astronomers turned their fancy to devising groups or constellations. Now, here's where it's going to get relevant. But the moving stars are planets, each with a motion and therefore will or influence of its own, right? As they knew and understood them, they were 7 in number. That's what they thought, 7. And now he tells you what the 7 are. Viz, 1 and 2, the moon and the sun. So count. The 2 objects which most closely and indubitably, my lisp, influence the tides, the temperatures, and the life in our planet. 3 and 4, the 2 inner planets, Mercury and Venus. So that's 4 so far, Mercury and Venus, which are morning and evening stars and never travel far from the sun. 5, 6, and 7, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the outer planets whose elongation from the sun on the ecliptic can be as wide as possible. The number 7 itself is a mystical number, as explained in note 5526. Okay, now, notice what he's going to say. It would be noticed that the sun and the moon and the 5 planets, God identified, these 7 planets in total, sun and moon and the 5 planets, they got identified, associated with, each with a living deity, god or goddess, with characteristics and qualities of its own. Now, before I read the rest of the part, did you catch what he just said? This is a Muslim whose Quran translation was widely circulated and distributed in the 20th century. Okay, did you see what he just said? The Arabs in Mecca, in Arabia, but in Mecca, worship the sun and moon and 5 planets as 7 gods and goddesses. 7, right? You're going to see the relevance in a minute. You're going to see the relevance in a minute. And I hope I don't put you to sleep here, okay? I want you to listen. It's the relevance. Now let me read the rest of it. Let me skip and let me get to the relevant part. He goes, and the Arabic word for the moon, qamar, the Arabic word for the moon, qamar, is of the masculine gender. And on the other hand, the Arabic word for the sun, shams, is of the feminine gender. The pagan Arabs evidently looked upon the sun as a goddess and the moon as a god. So the Arabs in Mecca, Arabia in general, but Mecca specifically because that's where Muhammad was born, they viewed the moon as the male god and the sun as the female god, or the goddess. That's going to be important. Okay, so basically, I don't need to read the rest of it, but you can read it on your own leisure. Okay, folks, let me bring out the implication. The sources teach that the Kaaba in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, was a shrine that housed 360 idols. This is in the Muslim sources. It's not non-Muslim sources. 360 idols, okay, which Muhammad eventually destroyed. Okay. The Muslim sources also admit these are all documented in the articles I gave you. So you need to read these articles so you can have the sources to use to your Muslim friends. Well, so where are you getting this from? Here, I got it from Abdullah Yusuf Ali. The pagans before Muhammad would perform what they call the rites of pilgrimage, right? Hajj and Umrah, meaning they would come to the Kaaba, and those who lived there didn't need to travel. The Kaaba, that cube building that's been rebuilt on more than one occasion in Mecca, and the pagans would run around it 7 times. 7 times. Something Muslims do to this day. Muslims adopted these practices from the pagans. Muslims, like the pagans before them, right, would run 7 times. Okay, and then there are 2 hills in Mecca called Safa and Marwa, and they'd run between these hills 7 times. 7 times. And the Muslim sources say that at one time there were 2 idols on both hills. There was an idol here and an idol there, and they'd run 7 times. Now, folks, can I ask you a question? Why did the pagans run 7 times between the 2 hills, Safa and Marwa, and run around the Kaaba 7 times, practices which Islam adopted, Muhammad observed, and Muslims continue to this day. But why did the pagans do it? Why did the pagans do it? They did it in worship of the gods and goddesses, the 7 planetary deities. Thank you. So folks, why in the world did Muhammad continue that practice? And why are Muslims running around the Kaaba 7 times and between the 2 hills 7 times, all of which even the Muslim sources admit were practices that the pagans observed because they believed in the sun and moon and 5 planets as god and goddesses that they had to worship and venerate? Why are the Muslims still doing it?